G'day brothers and sisters, this is the other Paul, and welcome to my brand new series, Anglican Doctrine. This video is a standalone introduction to the series, its content, and its goals, so that viewers can know precisely what to expect and what not to expect at the outset. The fact that I'm making a dedicated introduction to the series should communicate how much effort I am dedicating to it and the level of substance I hope for it to contain. As of this video's upload, I'm still researching the first episode proper, What is Anglicanism? And yeah, I'm not playing around. That said, let's get right to the point. Anglican Doctrine is a series where I investigate and explain the teachings of the Anglican tradition, specifically through the method of historical theology. By this, I mean that Anglicanism will be investigated as an identifiable tradition developed within a particular period of history. In short, this series will be fundamentally a work of history, but with obvious theological implications for fellow Anglicans. By way of example, let's say the question at hand is whether Arminian theology is permissible in Anglicanism. Having established just what constitutes Anglicanism in historical theology, its authoritative sources would then be consulted directly on the matter, starting from the most authoritative and moving down from there. Questions of language, historical context, and more will all be addressed in pursuit of extracting just what the tradition itself concretely teaches on the matter, if anything at all. What do the authoritative sources say about, say, predestination? What do they say about the freedom of the will? What were the positions of those who formulated or first received those sources? What was signified by key terms like gratia praeveniens or prevenient grace? So on and so forth, with similar questions until the answer is reached. Now, as hinted at earlier, answering any questions about what Anglicanism teaches on any issue presupposes this little thing called Anglicanism. That we can identify a concrete tradition or body of teachings that is properly denoted by the word. A huge problem I have with much Anglican literature and digital content is, and really a primary reason why I'm making this series, is how they will fight tooth and nail over what is the Anglican teaching on this or that issue, yet without having established just what Anglicanism is. Granted, there is a reason for this, and I think it is no accident that many, if not most, conscious and learned Anglicans converge on a similar answer, but I will leave that for the big video on the matter later. That said, there is not total unanimity on just what Anglicanism is. And so you'll have multiple self-described Anglicans bickering over whether this or that teaching is Anglican, while yet they hold completely different assumptions on how we determine what is Anglican. And as I said earlier, that even though most, I think, converge on a similar answer, even among those, they still tend to have some levels of differences that emerges and turns into tangible conflict on what the Anglican position is on this or that issue. And in the few times where I do see theologians try to answer the question of what is Anglicanism, I have often found them either underwhelming, incomplete, or just flat out wrong. This is what I will be changing with this series, especially the first episode where I answer that very question and do so from rigorous principles of historical method and philosophy. Once again, I'll let you see what I mean by that when the video drops. And that leads to another key feature of my series. I will not be waffling around with what this or that intellectual says or what the scholarly consensus is on a given question, nor will I be simply taking for granted what even the best historians of Anglicanism claim to be the case. As has always been a central pillar of my channel, I will be going to the primary sources themselves and extracting or synthesizing answers from them directly, and citing them clearly for each and every historical claim I make that pertains to my case, further allowing the interested viewer to check for himself and not just trust my word. Once again, this has been something that I see so many content makers fail to uphold, and I've even faced difficulties with professional historians making important claims for a given topic, and yet when I want to confirm for myself, they don't provide any sources. Not so with me. Not at all with me. In fact, I'd like you to think of one other content maker you know who spends his evenings reading through the minutes of the Convocations of Canterbury in 1563 and 1571 in Latin. Think I'll be waiting for a while there. All that to the side, that is how I hope to distinguish my series from most other productions on Anglicanism. Dispassionate historiography grounded in clear principles. Additionally, for all videos involving a major research project, including those outside of this series, I will be keeping a research diary of sorts in a document that tracks my study of the matter and the conclusions I come to. While I will naturally cite most sources I use in the videos themselves, not all of them will make it in, or not all of them may make it in, it depends. But all of them will be directly contained in this document, along with my pages upon pages of notes, including tables of different data points themselves. These documents will be uploaded exclusively for my supporters of all tiers on Locals. So if you want to see my raw study notes and the mountains of information therein on top of the final video, become a supporter today. Now I want to briefly discuss what the series is not. And this is almost as important as the prior positive articulation of what it is. First and foremost, as the Anglican Doctrine series is fundamentally historical, it is therefore not fundamentally theological. Now, on its face, this sounds completely absurd for a series called Anglican Doctrine, but by this, I do not mean that there is no theology in the content to come, the complete opposite, in fact. Rather, what this signifies is that the series will not address these matters according to the full principles of the science of theology, which are oriented towards discerning what true theology is and is not. In other words, theologians ask questions about what the true answer to X theological question is, but here I am asking what is the Anglican answer to that same question, regardless of whether or not it is true. This distinction is absolutely essential because it responds to yet another problem I see in discussions surrounding Anglicanism, that being a conflation of theological and historical questions. It is very common to see a discussion about what Anglicanism teaches on X or Y issue, only for it to subtly change into what is a biblical position or the biblical position, and sometimes vice versa. Though we as Anglicans obviously believe our tradition to be the truest representative of the biblical and Catholic faith, it is yet still necessary to distinguish these questions for the sake of clarity in our discussions. What also follows from this is that the series will not be my opinion on what the true position on a question is, or what I want Anglicanism to teach or hope that it teaches. For example, I do not believe that the 3 tiers of holy orders were all established as such by the apostles, but only as 2 offices. And yet it is entirely possible that the authoritative sources of Anglicanism, and thus Anglicanism itself, teaches the contrary, that there are 3 offices established by the apostles. In which case, I will simply record and repeat that fact in a video on the question, and not my opinion on whether I believe it to be ultimately correct. If I do address the question, it would be in a separate video in a different series or no series at all. Being able to separate personal desires from historical fact is an essential step that must become a normal feature of discourse if we are to have any hope of restoring some sense of unity to the Anglican Communion and the splinter branches. Having now established the nature of the Anglican Doctrine series, it is now necessary to explore just what my goals for the series are. Why am I making it? What need am I trying to fill here? One important goal is simply education. Whether Anglican or not, or even whether Christian or not, most people have little to no knowledge of the Anglican tradition, and I want to correct that because I am an Anglican, I am very consciously an Anglican, and I love my Anglicanism. I even aim for these videos to be of such a high quality that they can be used in university education and even by scholars who have just begun a research project. On top of that, a somewhat intentional byproduct I hope my videos produce will be the fascination of non-Anglican Christians in the tradition, not simply intellectually learning what it is, leading them to inquire after it and eventually adopt it themselves. I likewise want existing Anglicans to learn about their heritage and develop a genuine love for it, and not just bear the descriptor Anglican as an accident of the church he happens to attend. But my highest goal for this series is unity. It is more than well known that the Anglican Communion, throughout much of her history, but especially in the 19th century onwards, has engaged in a perpetual tug of war between multiple factions, all claiming to be the torchbearers of true Anglicanism. There are a number of such factions, but the main umbrellas, in my estimation, are Reformed Anglicanism and Anglo-Catholicism. The former centers Anglicanism on the Reformation and Reformed soteriology, while the latter prioritizes the wider Catholic heritage. These fundamental differences have led to disputes on almost all questions of theology and praxis, and as such, an especially passionate conflict over who truly represents Anglicanism. In these arguments, I've personally witnessed both sides conveniently cite Anglican sources that appear to support their position, while ignoring others which manifestly do not, leading to an endless loop of fruitless arguing and so on and so forth. And this applies not just to the large factions that I just mentioned, but to disputes between the other smaller factions as well, not just smaller ones, but just other factions in general, including the apostate liberals. Now, feel free to call me arrogant and naive, but I don't care. I really do aim for this series to provide definitive answers to these long-standing controversies by means of clear and solid principles of historical method consistently applied through a rigorous investigation of the primary sources. In doing this, I, once again, am not trying to prove the true answer to a question per se, but to demonstrate the historic Anglican answer so as to encourage self-professed Anglicans to be honest with the data and then make a meaningful, conscious decision on whether they follow Anglicanism on this question or not, or if they can even still call themselves Anglican. In other words, I want Anglicans to be honest with their history in order to be honest with themselves. That about does it for an introduction, and I hope you are all as excited as I am for what this series will become, and I truly hope and pray that it provides tangible edification to the body of Christ and to the Anglican Communion in particular. Thank you all very much for watching, and enjoy the content.